Hi, I'm Lauren Finley-Jacob.
Hi, I'm Dane Story.
And together we co-host the Of Common Clay podcast.
I'm a filmmaker, writer, backyard gardener, and permaculture enthusiast.
And I'm an ethnobotanist, an herbalist, a women's spirituality scholar, and a proud chicken mom.
And together we love talking about all these things and more, and finding ways to deepen our connection to the earth, to regenerative ways of healing and tending the land and feeding communities so that together we can live in abundance and of health and excellent food and more fun and more play and creativity in our lives.
We're really fascinated with myth and story and the intersections of food, health, wellness, medicine, and what these ancient teachings can bring into our future.
Thank you very much for being here, and welcome again to the Of Common Clay podcast.
At the beginning, there was nothing. At the beginning, there was everything. All things were one thing, and one thing, all things. There are many names for the beginning, many stories explaining the birth of the world. Some call this the Great Mother, the matrix, the web, the holy mediatrix creating, spinning, and weaving the world as we know it to be. The mother is the ether, the field upon which all else could be born. Great Mother is the medium to hold time and space, but is beyond time and space. She is beyond energy, but allows energy to exist. She is all things, and all things are her, but she is more than all things. Some say, at the beginning, Great Mother felt alone. Great Mother wanted more for the world. She wanted all things inside of her to be able to experience her creation, so Great Mother decided to expand. But before she could expand, she needed to create the concept of opposites, of polarity. Otherwise, nothing would know which way to go, and everything would be chaos, the original creation. To create order in this great web, two principles were born: yin and yang, masculine, feminine, expansion and contraction, and from there all things followed. Once there was darkness. Some mistook this darkness as a void, but do not be fooled. Darkness had a home in the great field, the ether, the Great Mother. This darkness was a vast ocean of possibility, and at the center of this darkness sparked one single light. Light was glorious and full of joy. Light was warm and vibrant, magnetic, some would say. All of the darkness wanted to be close to the light, and so darkness moved. Darkness moved so quickly that the light had nowhere else to go, the pressure of darkness so great that the only thing that light could do was pop! Let out a big sound, a sound of release. And so, through the dance of light and dark, our universe was birthed into the field. In this new world, the Great Mother created ways for light and dark to always be together. Because light and darkness could not exist each as a singular self, the pressure was far too great. The Great Mother created the way of abundance. Light would always create more light, and dark would always create more dark. The Great Mother also knew that without light, darkness would get stuck. Darkness needed light to be motivated to move. Without darkness, light would not be able to rest. light wouldn't be able to slow down. Thus, the Great Mother created the way of harmony. Light always found the darkness, and darkness always found the light. It's not perfect, but I started writing this story probably a year ago, and I started writing it as a way to make sense of what I believed about the universe. Because I feel like I've read so many things and so many things overlap with what I believe in, but I wanted to kind of consolidate it into my own words to basically sort out what I thought. And that's what I came up with.
I think it's really beautiful and evocative, and brings up both an emotional response and a visual kind of stimulation of what it means to like exist. And I think before I maybe expand upon my own feelings on a little bit about what you wrote and my own feelings on the creation myths we carry and my own sort of version of that, do you have anything else you'd like to share about the place this came from, or reflection on the writing, or anything that pops into mind that you want to expand upon aloud? Or
Well, I guess I'll first say that as I wrote in this story, there are so many ways to conceptualize the beginning of the universe. But I think that there's a lot of similarities when you start reading about anything from like the Vedic stories in India to the Kabbalah to the Tarot and like sacred geometry and like pretty much everything that I've come across, esoteric or spiritual, they all have their own very unique, beautiful stories, but there's a similarity to all of them. And I think with the connection of all things, it's more complex than I wrote. I tried to just really make it simple, talking about one aspect of polarity when there are infinite amounts of polarity. And I talk about ether a lot, but don't get into the elements yet. But there's also qualities to the energy that are very similar. And they have different names, but you know, they exist as like kind of like a fixed state, a moving state, and then kind of like a changeable state. The moving state's kind of like an initiatory state, I guess you would call it. So there are like a million ways to reconceptualize things and different ways to call the things. But they're all part of this kind of universal truth in a way that, yeah, just have different words and everyone's trying to explain them. So this is just my take on a little creation myth because, and we'll talk about creation myths this episode, is one of my main points.
Yeah. I think some of the things that came up for me in your story are your emphasis of light and dark, and the picture you paint is of this great continuum of energy that is all things. And I think that's the space we want to dwell on in this episode and in this conversation about what our stories and myths are, including our creation myths and our dominant culture myth creation myth of today, at least as far as the universe, is the Big Bang theory. And I think what your story does is it opens up this universe that is softer than that is not based in this explosion physics that we dwell in the modern age, which, as we'll get into in this episode too, some people that I love to read and myself, I have come to a place where the modern age means something like thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. And when we start thinking about other dimensional realities and the origin stories of the universe, I think it brings us into a better place to connect on a whole host of other things that are important for shared experience and living happy lives and all these things that seem to be kind of plaguing us as humans in this particular generation, if we want to separate time out like that into that absolute present. For me, I've always, I think a lot about language and the history of, and how, especially how the English language has co-opted a bunch of historical realities and kind of massaged our world into this world of separation instead of one of cohesion and continuum of the light and the dark. It puts binaries, especially in our storytelling. Star Wars is a perfect example of like the battle between good and evil. And they get into nuance in that story a little bit, but it's very, there's one side, there's the dark side, and then there's the light side. When I think the more we can come into a place where the dark needs the light and the dark is the light and the light is just darkness. The spaces we perceive as light is actually darkness being caught by light, and that these things are one and the same and we all are one and the same. And so I like to think about your story and my own kind of way of framing the language of the Big Bang and the origin time of the universe is the way we think about all life, and that is that things germinate and they grow. And what do they grow from? They grow from this cosmic energy code. And there's a lot of different historical language words specific to that. In today's science, we might call it something like the biocode of our living earth. That how does a sunflower seed know to become a sunflower plant and then to make sunflowers? It has memory. And it's also fed an energy from a greater source because it's part of this continuum. And where did that seed come from? Did it come from the flower? It's the chicken and the egg story too. And I think the more you come to looking at our origin stories and listen to as many different people speak about their experience firsthand with these energies, the more we come to this place of peace rather than destruction in our myth stories, which can translate to, I think, much more positive energy spaces in our day-to-day lives and existence as people.
Yeah, I think in modern scientific narrative, it's kind of like the Big Bang was pointless, Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's people that have accepted that theory while also having their own spiritual beliefs and kind of reconciling with that. But I just truly believe that all science is also story, and the way we tell it is really important. And you mentioned the myth of separation or the story of separation, which many people, I think, in kind of the realm of philosophy that we talk about, that love I mean, some are Indigenous wisdom keepers, some of them are earth-based land tenders, some, you know. Mm-hmm. I think when you're a part of the whole of what is around you, it's easier to see because you're actually in it and working with it. You're like really aware of the water and the air and the sun and the soil and the bugs and the poop and the chickens and the worms and the everything. So you're constantly dealing with the web of life. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful way of living. But, I mean, I've had a 9-to-5 office job too. So I know how easy it is to get sucked out of that reality, the reality that we came from and the reality that nourishes us. And the story of separation, it's a hard one. It's a hard one because it's what we're taught in school. It's what we're taught about the origins of the universe. You know, it's what we were taught about life evolving, that it was all not purposeful, like that it was all accidental, and that it was all like autonomously. And a similar way that you kind of think of this birth of the world as a germination rather than an explosion. And I think there's a really profound difference to be made there in like how you conceptualize those things. There's also this notion and concept of like the first organisms evolving from being basically like single-celled organisms in the sea to being multicellular life forms that have evolved further. And for a long time, the narrative was that it was like this autopoietic way of being. Like being, what that means is basically like self-making and self-evolving. So it's like this one single cellular organism, like, whoop, just decided to evolve, or, you know, or maybe even not decided. I don't think a lot of people put that level of consciousness into these beings, but there's a reconceptualization that can occur, and Donna Haraway writes about this in Staying with the Trouble, of shifting that language into sympoiesis, which means making with, basically. So, you know, instead of an organism like accidentally evolving or like eating something and then it getting trapped and like making itself, it's like of joint benefit of all life to come together and evolve together. And that story changes our conceptualization of single things, survival of the fittest, me looking out for myself and myself alone, to we're in this together, we're evolving, and all things are relationship.
Yeah, and like you were hinting at, and we may touch more of these spheres and subjects in this episode and in upcoming ones about energy and consciousness and time and the like, but you know, when you start examining the realms of consciousness, of quantum physics, of the unified field, the Akashic records, which you probably know a little bit more about than me, but what these real things that many people have experienced, and that's how we know they're real, and written about and spoke about. These things are real, but only in a world where the separation myth gets attention and gets sort of called out for what it is. It's not the way. It's not the truth. It's just there are natural divisions that take place in the universe. It is part of life, but when we dwell in that reality rather than one of expansive consciousness and rather than one of tapping into these higher realms through meditation, and there's so many ways to meditate too, and it's a practice. no matter what form of meditation you're doing, whether it be journaling can be meditation, listening to music can be meditation, but if you're doing these things passively rather than with intention and allowing yourself to believe they can allow you to experience higher realms and higher forms of consciousness and interconnectivity and interbeing rather than separation. Those are just the things that I've been working on throughout my life, and it's a journey. It's not a linear path, and that's part of what our Big Bang Theory and our survival of the fittest theories try to say, is like there's this maybe it's an exponential curve, so it's not like a straight line linear, but it still is like not this thing with peaks and valleys and the real ebb and flow we know if we pay attention to true histories and even present realities that are sort of distorted and put into boxes so that keep us kind of confused and from experiencing these higher truths and greater states of consciousness, because we are still dwelling in this first realm of more of a nihilistic way of seeing the world. And we are, I think, growing human consciousness all at the same time. There's an awakening going on in this time of colonialism that feels only oppressive and only divisive and only warlike a lot of the times, because that's what we're giving our attention and focus to. But there's so much beautiful work and so much beautiful energy being poured into permaculture and biodynamic agriculture and regenerative farming and actually rekindling native peoples with their land. That is happening, and we need to, I think, that's part of the consciousness raising, is like realizing that when we're in relationship with all of these source things, the worms, the chickens, the earth, it's easier to accept that there is this greater truth, that there is this sort of softer story of where we came from. And it's nuanced and complex for its beauty. It doesn't have to be this straight line of progress of ape to human over the course of a fixed amount of time. There's probably a lot more beauty and complication and sympoiesis in that evolution to how we are who we are today. And those are the fun things to focus on and talk about.
Pretty much. I think for me, I do a lot of reading what I tend to call like quantum biology. I don't know how many people really call it that. It's pretty much like energy work, but Bruce Lipton makes a really good point where he says, like, standard classical Newtonian physics has, like, over the past, especially 3 decades, done so much work to get into this state of quantum understanding. Unfortunately, there's a lot of, what would you call them, physicists? I was like, that's not the right word. There's a lot of physicists that don't work in the quantum realm, but I think it's becoming way more appropriate because it actually makes more sense in connecting what we know about what's observable at the different levels, so at the tiny microscopic level to the grand mass level of things that are observable. So we kind of have that going, but like in biology, there's the same laws apply for everything, and that's kind of the lie that we've been told, is that like, oh, there's like, this is how you do chemistry and it's in a bubble, and then this is how you do physics and it's in a bubble, and this is how you do biology and it's in a bubble. But actually, they're all the same thing. Like, all life uses molecules and chemistry, and all of that is governed by these rules of physics. But what ends up happening is this reductionist mechanistic way of conceptualizing those things, and it's very mechanical. That way of seeing things doesn't exactly translate into biological life forms, but really all things follow the same laws. They just do. And so there becomes these like wedges and gaps in our understanding, the mechanistic model understanding of our biological systems and how they actually function. And so I always find it to be the most fascinating coming across people whose research is so far out of the common narrative that they're basically questioning things like, okay, does the second law of thermodynamics actually exist? Because in a biological system, it's not true that way. So reconceptualizing things, and that's how true science has evolved over time into today. But a lot of what we call science now is just very dogmatic. It's very specifically taught in school, and the ways that it's taught in school mostly are for STEM, which it's so funny because I was trained as a scientist, and so I have a lot of friends that are very into STEM, and it becomes this kind of like badge of badge of honor, of proclamation, like, oh, I'm a woman in STEM. But what I want to see more of is like less of the STEM, because it's so specific and linear. It's so focusing on technology, engineering, all these like very man-made things, you know? And instead move more to like this transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, like ecological systems thought way of teaching and exposing and explaining the world. But to get there through quantum biology, through creation stories, we have to understand in mass that energy is all things, and energy and consciousness precedes matter. But it's hard to make definitive statements because they are a complex spectrum that are swirling between each other. So right. Matter does influence energy, and energy does influence matter. But when you start getting into the quantum biological realm of understanding and quantum physics and whatnot, you start understanding more deeply, and for some measurably, because some people, let's face it, only believe measurable things that humans design in experiments, as if that's like somehow truer than just like really experiencing things. Okay. Yeah. But you start understanding like how matter is really just a dense crystallization of energy into this form. But all of it is energy. And like the smaller you actually try to get and see it, like the more it's just, quote, empty space. Because what it is, and what an atom just is like this buzzing, fluctuating ball of energy. And even in our modern conceptualizations of an atom, how are we drawing it, right? We're drawing it as like, here's the nucleus, here's an electron, here's an electron, here's an electron, here's an electron, like in this very definitive way. And we draw a circle around it to say like, oh, well, it could exist anywhere here, instead of like drawing an electron and going like, just scribbling all over the place and shading it all in, because every little thing that we're taught really impacts how we see things. And when we see things as these discrete little balls of energy, like that's how we're going to see them. We're going to see them as these isolated things, instead of these things that are fluctuating, fluid, and mixing and mashing and changing. And it's just a whole different way of truly conceptualizing the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just the act of drawing an atom is this reconceptualization of something that is what you're saying is just this vibrant energy, and we draw it in this a lot of times in a two-dimensional way. Sometimes they get three-dimensional treatment and color and whatever it is, but yeah, I think that conversation is something that we have talked about often, about what you started a little bit describing how like we separate the sciences out into physics and biology and chemistry, when they're all the same, and it's this Newtonian physics world that dominates our culture and the sciences that, says gravity is just because things have mass and matter and the physical thing, and that's what draws them to each other. And we also know, though, that it's much more complicated than that, and there's an energetic connection and a resonant field around all things that are matter, that is energy, but it's also matter. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean it isn't sort of also part of. I think we need to expand what the physical world is into what exactly you're talking about, a physicist. And there are more people studying physics, and it's funny that you said physician at first, because those are the same root word, and it's why our mechanistic, reductionist physician world is caught up in this physics world. But the more we can, and there are so many physicians and doctors who are doing that work of expanding their consciousness into these realms of traditional, really old ways of healing that aren't caught up in separating out the sciences. And one other interesting thing that I learned kind of recently, because I love looking up the history of words and kind of where they come from, and matter, not only is matter a synonym for, we use it for something that matters, which I think is interesting because we treat matter with such this irreverence in the warlike separation culture, because we don't realize matter has energy and consciousness and sentience in this way that we do. But I think Greek, probably tracing back to the Greek language, it was matter, M-A-T-R, which is also a synonym for mother, which is also the first matter, and all that matters.
And matrix. They're all the same.
And that's why you studied what you studied in school, I think, a lot, and why I'm so inspired by some of the stuff you studied and conversations we've had, because ecofeminism is this convergence of philosophy and the ecological sciences, which is this deeper attempt to entangle, especially ecological sciences that include the philosophical and art. That's another thing with the STEM program that I get caught up on. Our colleges and universities used to call undergraduate programs arts and sciences.
Yeah.
Because there was at least an acceptance and a realization that these things need each other. But, in the era that we grew up in America, they slashed art department fundings across, elementary and middle and high schools, and colleges too kind of got that treatment in slightly different ways. Sure, you could go to art school, but you were looked at as like a weirdo if you chose to go to film school for college, or certainly more of the fine arts than that. But I got that rounded education in college, like that. I studied film, but I also took math and sciences, and I didn't go all the way, deep to advanced chemistry or physics. But the foundation, I think, is what we need to create so that we can all feed off of and learn from each other in these really deep ways that the stories of separation in the STEM program has us all competing, for who's right in the science world. Even people that tend to agree on what science is, that's the world they're dwelling in, which is that war separation world. And STEM at one point was going to be STEAM, and that they decided no. Nah.
Is A the art?
Yeah.
Oh, bye art.
Yeah.
It's just funny because art, obviously it's very important to us because it's a way of being in the world. That's how I see it. Yeah. And it's kind of I feel real fast, I just wanted to mention, I do think there is a lot of collaboration in science, so I don't want to just make it sound like we think that all science is just competing and
no.
But with art, it just is, it's just it's in our modern narrative, it's they're an artist, they just kind of see the world differently, and as if you can't just always be both. And yeah, I took a lot in grad school. I took some ecology classes, and then I also took classes that were all about like epistemologies and pedagogy styles. So like what is considered knowledge, and then like how we go about teaching knowledge. And I focused a lot on trying to bring up this point, like we need to be able to have artistic practices of learning the world around us. And if we don't, it is not embodying this truly like creative, entangled way of being and learning. Like there's just like, it's hard to explain unless you experience it. But I guess off the cuff here, like imagine, okay, we have backyard chickens. There's, I think we'll have an episode all about chickens because we will talk about them a lot. But imagine just learning about a chicken like in a book with a diagram as an encyclopedia and just like memorizing everything versus learning about a chicken through living with a chicken versus learning about a chicken just spending time looking into their eyes and mimicking their sounds and moving your body like they do. And how much different can you learn about a chicken when you're like next to and behaving as if you're a chicken? Like there's like, it's just a completely night and day different world. Like you're in their energy flow, you're in their field, you start having conversations with them and singing with them and all of these things. And I think that's not a unique experience. I feel like I do that with my cats, you know, and no, I'm not a cat. I'm not trying to pretend to be a cat, but like, it's like this level of ritualistic play that allow us to really start knowing these things on a deeper level than like knowledge that purely comes from I don't even want to say the mind, because I feel like the mind when open can receive a lot, but it's from this like read, learn, memorize, test, right, wrong dynamic. That is just like not it. The more we lean fully into that and less out of the experiential ways of learning and being and all of that, then the further we lean into the story of separation, the expert authority model, the handing down of knowledge, and it's all a system of hierarchy when you get into that place. So yeah, I'll leave it there. I know you have a lot to say about art in this.
Yeah. I mean, I'll get to that, like a little more of some of the teachers and philosophers and thinkers and artists who have inspired me and deepened my way of appreciating the conscious world and the realms that are accessible to us beyond what we're taught in Western schools, especially, and the like. And that for me, I think one of the ways to really get to a place where you're comfortable in that exploration and comfortable writing, it might seem egotistical, right, for like an individual to write an origin story of the universe. But once you realize that you are the universe and the universe is you and all...
Wait, are you calling me egotistical? Sorry, go on.
Yes. No, I was trying to say that somebody might feel for themselves that that's not a journey they're ready to do. No, I know. I think it's an important clarification, because I'm trying to say that, like, I think one of the ways, if you're not feeling like up for that task, because it might feel like too expansive of a challenge, one of the ways that becomes easier is by examining your own origin story. And where does that come from? Does it come from conception? Does it come from the day you were born? Does your existence trace back to before conception? But start with conception maybe first, and maybe some astrology, and maybe just when you were born and around that time, what was going on? Like, who were the people around you? What kind of things were you taking in? What grabbed and defined your world at like 2 to 5 in your earliest memories? And for me, I was fortunate. My parents allowed me to be free, and all the people that helped raise me for the most part, maybe minus some babysitters. No, but it's always tough, like that realm of parenting, I can only imagine. But anyway, for the most part, my 99% of the people that were helping raise me, like, just let me play and be and experience. And in fact, they, infused my mind and body with, what's the right way to say it? Like, poetry and art and other ways of thinking than where, like, the Western sphere of knowledge where we come from Buddhist thought and poetry. And I meditated as a younger than 5-year-old because my parents started getting into exploring some of these things that we're talking about today back 30 plus years ago. 40 plus years ago for them was their journey, or more than that. And a lifelong journey is this practice of discovering consciousness and kind of trying to expand the ways we can be together. And everything, as you were getting deeper into there, is like everything is about relationship. And we've talked about this already, but like the relationship with the chickens is powerful. And no, you're not trying to be a chicken, but it's amazing the human things you can learn from mimicking chickens and being close to chickens and watching them be. And some of them aren't tangible things. Like, I'm not going to start digging for bugs in the garden myself and eating
Speak
them.
for yourself.
Well, good luck with that. Let me know if you find anything tasty.
You see bugs in the garden, I see dinner. I'm just kidding.
But yeah, anyway, I'll leave it at that. It's like the learning is energetic as much as anything else. It's watching them interact with each other and play with each other and kind of peck at each other, but then cuddle up with each other at night before they go to sleep and, squawk and sing songs when the other one is laying an egg. How beautiful is that? They're singing for their friends laying an egg and giving birth into the world. So yeah, those are some things that inspire me, and I think. Do you have anything you want to share transitioning from there?
I really wanted to also talk about how, while I do believe that everything is energy, including matter, it's just a denser form of energy, basically. Yeah, matter's kind of like a perception, I would say. But form is what allows us to experience the world. And while I do think in terms of, because I was trying to think of how I wanted this episode to go, I was thinking I really wanted to talk about it because there's going to be some way more intense episodes in the future of like really specific texts and thought leaders, but I didn't feel like I could actually talk about them until we at least have a foundational episode kind of starting to talk about at least energy and matter and how I perceive it. Because if you can't understand that consciousness precedes matter, or at the very least that it is entangled in matter, then everything else isn't going to make sense to you. And we're not taught that. We're kind of taught that matter actually exists outside of consciousness, and that consciousness is a byproduct of our smart, evolved human brains, and that everything else is dead, which is not how a huge majority of the people in this world see that. They see things as having consciousness, having spirit, and in the spirituality realm, I feel like often there can be this tendency to like also want to escape matter, like, no, we should transcend and sorry, there's a duck in the backyard. In the pool.
Oh. Fine.
That was way too cute to not
Literally
recognize that. I just saw
Okay.
the reflection.
Maybe she'll stay, or he.
Okay, it's beautiful moments like that. We might cut that out, but if not, it's beautiful moments like that I think are exactly what we're talking about when it's talking about like being in relationship to the beauty of the universe. It's like as you were speaking, I was having these flashes of like, it's not, I don't believe it's the goal to like only remove ourselves and meditate and tap into this like big huge net, or like in our quietness. That's an aspect of it that can be beautiful, and I think that's a way that we can tap back into our spiritual nature. But I believe that it's what we're here to do is to like be in that mode of being, but then experience it outwardly with all things around us. And so it's like being in that place of really not just thinking that we have this oneness, but feeling the oneness and then going out and engaging with it.
Yeah.
So going out and like feeling a waterfall and like engaging with it, talking to it, like saying hello, like bringing it gifts. We've had this experience, so I like sharing it because I always think about this one waterfall and how special she is, and how like she is this just unique expression and energy. And the more you can experience life like that, like the more I'll speak for myself, the more I can experience life in that way, the more magical it feels, the more in love I feel with everything, and the more supported and tapped in I feel to everything around me too. And I believe that is where health exists. That is where happiness exists. It's all in relationship, and it's all in each moment. I can leave it there. I think I say that expression a lot. I could leave it there. But I could ramble about that for a while, so I'll throw it to you. What do you think?
I think that, you know, I'm gonna share a few things, and maybe I'll start right now with reading a little bit, because we talked about art and we talked about the story of separation. And I think first I'll just say that one of the big stories of our era of life is climate change. It spanned decades. It used to be called global warming in the dominant Western culture. Now we call it climate change. And there's lots of arguments about this subject for very good reason, because it's this abstract, bigger than all of us, bigger than anybody could possibly comprehend, sort of wicked problem that is a phrase I'm going to steal from the book that I'm going to read an excerpt from, Dark Ecology, which is a book that really kind of changed my life in a lot of ways, I would honestly say. You know, a lot of things become synchronistic when you open yourself up to the universe. And when you are an artist in our culture, you struggle against lots of people telling you, no, you can't do that. And even if they don't say it outright to your face, there's that energy of, and in today's modern culture, like if you want to be an artist, like in order to like survive, you have to become what we call a celebrity. You have to like have fame and a huge following or whatever it is, and be in these cultures where we produce like this mass art. And I think,
and you have to sell your art.
Right. And often that, you know, that's just a complicated field and there's a lot of advantage taking of people in their time that are artists in that way. And it happens in so many spheres today. You know, the marketing and PR world is co-opted by very talented artists who are, you know, advertising arguably for poison products a lot of the time, fast food and pharmaceuticals and the oil and gas industry and the like. Anyway, I'll get right to it. I'm going to read this part of Dark Ecology. It's actually the opening of the book, and Dark Ecology is by Timothy Morton, who is an ecological philosophical thinker and teacher and writer, and he wrote a book called Ecology Without Nature, which is a little bit about what we were talking about in our second episode. But he writes about this world we've built that is separate from nature, and this concept that we've created that is nature. And he kind of writes that it is this concept, but it's like dwelling in this conceptual world of nature that keeps us repeating sort of stories of separation and war and placing ourselves outside of and against nature rather than in this cohesive coexistence. Anyway, the I guess, what do you call it? Preface to this book, Dark Ecology, is titled beginning. It's not titled preface, but anyway.
The preface?
Preface. That's what I used to call it. I used to skip the preface too, because I was like, what's a preface? But sometimes some of the best stuff is in the preface. Like in this case, I think it really sets up rethinking about where we place our emphasis. And that one other thing that ends up getting written about across, if you read a lot of philosophy, is that thoughts and ideas are things as much as this table and as much as this cup and as much as this book. And so that's where I'll start before I read. So I'll stop before I read. Beginning after the end. There are thoughts we can anticipate, glimpsed in the distance along existing thought pathways. This is a future that is simply the present, stretched out further. There is a not yet thought that never arrives, yet here we are thinking it in the paradoxical flicker of this very sentence. If we want thought different from the present, if we want to change the present, then thought must be aware of this kind of future. It is not a future into which we can progress. This future is unthinkable, yet here we are thinking it. Coexisting, we are thinking future coexistence, predicting it and more, keeping the unpredictable one open. Yet such a future, the open future, has become taboo, because it is real, yet beyond concept, because it is weird. Art is thought from the future. Thought we cannot explicitly think at present. Thought we may not think or speak at all. If we want thought different from the present, then thought must veer toward art. To be a thing at all, a rock, a lizard, a human, is to be in a twist. How thoughts long to twist and turn like the serpent poetry. Or is art veering toward thought? Does it ever arrive? The threads of fate have tied our tongues. Tongue twisters incline towards nonsense. Logic includes nonsense as long as it can tell the truth. The logic of nonsense. The needle skipped the groove of the present. Into this dark forest you have already turned, and I take present to mean for the last 12,000 years. A butterfly kiss of geological time.
Good one.
Yeah, the point I'll make right away is this is a book about climate change essentially, but he doesn't write super explicitly about that modern crisis. He writes about it in terms of the human thought patterns and stories that have operated human action, activities, civilization, societies for 12,000 years. And this ecological crisis that we're in today is because of a lack of ecological awareness and spiritual thinking. It is this story of separation that we've been hinting at. It is a world that disparages art instead of celebrates it as like the only thing, and that we're all creative beings, and that expressing that creativity is our gift back to the world. And that's how we can create better symbiosis in our communities and in our ecologies, both.
Yeah, it makes me think about how I read this paper, and I won't share too much because I think we'll end up talking a lot about matriarchal societies and gift economies and the maternal gift economy and all these things. But I read this little paper called The 9 Principles of a Matriarchal Aesthetic, and it kind of outlines all these things. But one thing she talks about, Heidi Gottner-Abendroth, this author, she writes about how art in the matriarchal sense is like ritual and ceremony and process and being, and it is not finished, it's not objectifiable, and it definitely can't be sold. So she starts like really bringing a more interesting discussion into like what aesthetic is when it started getting co-opted into something other than what it was. And I think expressing that is a way that humans have existed forever. The creative dance, and I mean, she goes into this talk too about appealing to the clouds in rain dances, because rain dances exist kind of across the whole world, different ways, different practices, and different contexts, but like people's believing they can influence the weather is not unique necessarily to one type of indigenous lineage. So she speaks about how in modern society we believe that that is like an instance of like, oh, dumb humans, they thought that they could like bring rain out of the atmosphere for no reason, just because they needed it and they were desperate. And she changes this narrative to really explain like, actually, the peoples that participate in weather dances, rain dances, know the weather so intimately that they can tell when it's exactly on the verge of rain. They also believe that the depending on what it is, sky gods, cloud gods, rain gods, whatever, the energy field and being of rain and of cloud structures, that it can be appealed to. How do you appeal to it? You appeal to it through emotion and intention, which, as we'll get into, these are the ways that the quantum field works. Very clear intention and sustained emotion is how quantum manifesting exists, how witchcraft and spellcraft exists, how it goes on and on and on. They're the very similar ways, different contexts, different protocols, but sustained emotion, real true emotion, and intention. And the way you do this as a rain dance is to go into that creative state of being. And in this way, you literally are then co-creating the result, which is the rain. That's a very different way of behaving and participating in the world. The same way that, like, I hope our sense of ecological ways of being, like especially in the garden space or farm space, start going more into this way of like, no, we should be praying and meditating with seeds and singing and dancing to them, because that is what has been done for so long. And if you look at like the more European pagan lineages of ritual, we now classify it as the wheel of the year. They're all based off of basically like the sun holidays. They weren't as strictly practiced back then. Some things have been lost, but whatever. Mm-hmm. That's a whole big discussion. But they're often like basically like harvesting celebrations, and they were celebrations and ritual and appealing and praying and chanting and dancing, and like they were festival basically.
Yeah, I think those stories about, communication with the natural world, with the clouds and the rain, bring about just a sort of metaphor of sorts for me. Like, and it's just, the way we engage with all other organisms, but let's take people, for example. Like, if you're a little skeptical of the human ability to commune and communicate with the rain and the rain clouds, you know, everything is relational. And the power of manifestation is real. And so like if somebody you know, friends come over, say Jim comes over, and Jim's just, you know, you don't read him in any particular way of like positive or negative energy. It's just like Jim's coming over. But if you give off like sort of like, even if you don't say these words aloud, like, oh, what the heck is Jim doing here? Like a lot of times humans do with the rain or the natural world. Then where's Jim's energy gonna go? Is it gonna build a more beautiful and reciprocal relationship with you? No, it's probably gonna kind of set Jim off, and Jim might even eventually never show up, really. If that energy persists in the way you engage when any entity, human, animal, the rain, is present in your world. And I think, yeah, operating in ways where we can trust the universe to give us what we need and call in what we need, I think is just really important. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Okay, good.
But you're talking about Jim so much, I'm just thinking about Dwight and how offended he'll be that he wasn't invited.
Bears eat beets. Oh. Bears beets Battlestar Galactica.
Bears do not. What is going on? What are you doing?
Michael!
Identity theft is not a joke, Jim. Millions of families suffer every year. Michael! Oh, that's funny. Michael!
Good. Office references coming back.
Yeah, they'll never go away, really.
No way. Anyway, so yeah, I appreciate you sharing those stories about, you know, that have been reflected in, you know, historical and oral accounts from people that live with the land and with the natural world, and commune with those and have actual reciprocal relationship with the earth. Know the power of these things is real.
Yeah, and one thing I know I've definitely mentioned in my class, so I'll recycle the idea here on the podcast. But I bought this book in this really wonderful native Hawaiian bookstore. It's made and printed here. And I'm forgetting the exact title. We'll link it in the show notes. I think it's called like Hānau something. But I really have no clue. Anyways, the book is a compilation of all of the names for rain that have been documented in the native Hawaiian language, Kanaka Oiwi. And so there's over 500. Like, I just bring that up because I don't speak that language. In reading this book was just like my mind was blown, and I think I might have slightly teared up when I saw it because it's just one of those things. The book is beautiful, by the way. It has like these translucent inserts with like these beautiful pictures of different plants from Hawaii, and oh my god, it's just gorgeous. Very well done book. It would be a great gift for anybody. But to have over 500 names, think about the level of like intimacy and I would say like poeticism, because a lot of them are in like songs and chants. Some are like recorded in newspapers, which is how a lot of the native language was not lost through the colonial periods where the language became illegal. And so you have a lot of written records of the language in that way, the newspaper and periodicals. But that level of intimacy, can you think of anything that you could describe 500 ways? Like in English? Like, I can't.
No, but that's part of what I was hinting at, that I'm not a scholar on language at all. I just like to observe these histories and origins and things like that. Yeah, they do. They bring an a visceral, like emotional response, because there's a beauty in acknowledging that the rain is not just one thing. But that's where like English and colonial societies replace the language, and they outlaw the oral tradition and the speaking of a language like the native Hawaiian language, and millions of, probably, I don't know if millions is the right number, but thousands anyway across the entire earth, and it loses a lot. It loses spirit, it loses knowledge, it loses our sense of connection to one another and to the natural world and what reality even is. And we, talked about this a little bit last time, but I'll say right now real quick that our perceptions of reality are beyond our five senses, but at the very least, those are the tools we have as humans to know what's real and what's true, and our emotions come from our senses, and that's a thing that is discounted as a sense. But our emotional spectrum is it's a sense in and of itself. I mean, the amount of senses we actually have as living beings is potentially infinite. Is a way I would reframe the five senses. But these things that we've defined are important, but we desensitize ourselves in all sorts of ways with media and culture and learning and education systems and drugs and pharmaceutical drugs especially, and toxins in our ecosystems too, keep us from fully embodying our body and loving our body. And part of ecological and consciousness raising and awareness is loving all the parts of your own body, and appreciating the cells in your body, and learning to breathe deep is a fundamental step in that, in being able to be a better meditation practicer and accessor of these ways to go deeper. One of the mechanisms of English language is the term subconsciousness, as though there's some other place you have to go to experience and realize consciousness, that it's somehow either in here somewhere only, or down there maybe, or maybe you have to ascent to it, maybe that's the sub, but in any case it's separate from everything else. It's this place to go to rather than the be here now of witnessing everything as one. Anyway, you had another important thing to share that I think echoes all of this a bit.
Yes, I have a plug for a very incredible book by a very intelligent being named Sherri Mitchell. Her book is called Sacred Instructions, Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change. Highly recommend. And funny enough, in her chapter titled From Attraction to Conscious Co-Creation, she has this really beautiful quote I wanted to share, because earlier you mentioned ideas and thoughts existing as real as a leaf and a stone, kind of. And I've heard other people explain this. I think it's in the book Big Magic by, what's that lady's name who did Eat, Pray, Love? Elizabeth Gilbert. Her book Big Magic is very sweet. I love that book. Sometimes when I need to just have positivity in my mind before I go to sleep, I just start reading a random chapter of it. It's a great story. But she talks all about actually creativity and harnessing that, or not harnessing, tapping in and living that way. And she talks about ideas as kind of being these own unique, discrete things, kind of floating around or something that visit you and come to you, and that our ideas aren't ours. And if you don't act on an idea, they're also visiting other people because they want to be expressed and shared. And if you don't do it, they're going to go, as Sherri explains, to the basically kind of the path of quickest emergence, because that's how energy flows in nature. So this idea is amongst all kinds of people that are thinking it, that ideas are these unique things that are autonomous almost of themselves. So what Sherri says though is, Any thought or idea that enters our energy field comes in through an existing pattern. This is true for all seemingly new thoughts and ideas that arise individually or collectively. They are guided by a wisdom that leads them to the most accessible entry point into the stream of consciousness. Each new evolutionary pattern is subtly introduced into our stream of consciousness so that we can flow with it gently and become accustomed to its rhythms. This ensures that those thoughts or ideas will be accepted. She goes on a lot further than that. It's great, but I just thought that was a beautiful little thing to share, because when you start getting into the realm of different interpretations of biology, different ways of seeing energy in the realm of like quantum biology or natural law, you get into these ideas like Rupert Sheldrake, who writes A New Science of Life, who talks a lot about morphic resonance fields, this idea that not everything is just genetics. Genetics are like our instructions of how to make the form of things, but we have this greater energy field around us that is actually what is instructing our bodies what to do. It's reading that energy, and that's basically for humans where your aura comes from. Also, there was this I was going to say scientist, but I'm pretty sure he was a doctor. He worked at Yale back in the day. Harold Burr, B-U-R-R, and he did this crazy energy mapping. I first heard about it where he basically was like mapping through this device that I can't speak enough on the device. I don't know that much about it. But basically, he was mapping through this device a salamander egg and charting the energy of it. And what he kind of expected to find was like something along the lines of like a baby salamander. But what he found is like the egg of the salamander was actually basically like emitting this energy of the imprint of a mature salamander, which is so interesting. But his work later went on to use the same technology to basically map human, like their electrical conductivity, basically. So he basically was mapping their energy field, their auric field, their energy body, subtle energy body. These are all different ways of explaining it. And he could start predicting all of these things by starting to know intimately what the energy field meant for health. So he could predict and help remediate individuals getting cancer, because basically, to summarize briefly, if you have splotchy holes in your auric field, which is oftentimes because of traumatic incidences, blocked stagnant energy, so not expressing emotions or having a weakened sense of spirit, purpose, any of that stuff, that's how energy gets solidified and stuck in the body. Your matter is influencing your energy around you. That energy around you is what is coding your body of what to do. So you start having things not work right, okay? So when you start measuring this field, you can start seeing where blockages are, how severe they are, how likely then you are to get these degenerating diseases like cancer, okay? And even more fascinating, what he learned is when you start mapping women and their cycles is you can, so I also learned that he is responsible for like basically like discovering, whatever, but like bringing the hormone estrogen into like our consciousness, and how important has that been for women's health and understanding cycles and all this stuff, and even learning how herbs affect that specific compound better and deeper. So anyway, he talks about how on a woman's cycle, you can measure them energetically. And what he's learned though, is that actually for many women, some women ovulate across their whole cycle, some ovulate only at a really specific time, and some have no real correlation between their menstruation cycles and their ovulation cycles. And he could map it. He said it was so specific in the body because it has a very real energetic signature on the body. So just imagine if like more of our medicine, our physicians utilize technology that understood that everything is energy. And I mean, there are a lot of humans doing that, so I don't want it to sound like there's not, because there are, and there's some crazy, wicked, cool devices of like energy devices that you can actually use on the body, and different signatures that you can play for your body, that your body can hear and help resolve some of these things. So that all gets crazy. But I think energy fields, there's a lot of really cool quacks that know a lot of really cool stuff about how that works.
Yeah, and then that can bring us back to like individuals' power in experiencing energy and reality and knowing what's right for them in their existence, that is taken away from us through a lot of mechanisms of teaching and media and programming in our culture. That, like, you know, that the basic things we need to be comfortable and thrive are, you know, are the air. So breathing, and breathing properly, and breathing through the nose, and breath work, which I am just scratching the surface of learning more and more about. And there's so many great teachers across the world that have slightly maybe different ways of going about it, but it brings together this idea that what we draw in is connected to everybody else and the power of that. And when we exhale, we're also exhaling a gift. There's some breath work people will tell you, you're breathing in the good and you're breathing out the bad. But that's still caught up in this good-bad dichotomy and energetics of that you need to pump stuff out of your body, rather than like our exhale, we know, even the science world knows feeds the plant world. And so there's this cycle when you start really deeply paying attention, and then after breath becomes food and water.
Well, and also I will just real quickly tease that there are some really interesting perspectives that an overwhelming majority of our nutrition actually comes from the air, not from the minerals in the foods that we eat. So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, well, I was gonna only touch on food and water to bring it back to energy and intuitive eating. There's other ways to phrase that or frame that, but like knowing what your body likes and needs is an important learning for you to do. Not you, but all of us. I think it's
me too.
Yeah, but I didn't want to put it on the you of our audience either. But for anyone to do, I think, and it's not an easy thing because we're teased by so many faux foods to our healthy, energetic residents. And one example of the natural world, not always being, we shouldn't ingest everything in the natural world. We talked about this a little bit a couple episodes ago. If there's gasoline in the water, don't drink that water. You can smell it. And if you do taste it, right away, this is not for me. And I think there are ways to deepen our connections even more. If you want to feel good and be healthy and live a playful life and expand consciousness, then that knowing what foods give you good residence and water that gives you good energy and residence, I think is super important. I do think that you're right though to point out that breath is the most important thing to life. We take it for granted because it's the thing they can't commodify.
They can try to poison it though.
And they do.
Yeah, but the free medicine is the best medicine. That's
It is.
what I try to share.
Yeah. Same. And I think art and creative experience and play are some of the most important medicines that I just wish for everybody in this year and going forward, more of that in their lives. I think that can bring a lot more intentional peace into our world. I'm not a Buddhist, but from an early age, Buddhism was in some way or another, and some Buddhist practices and art were in my life. And this is a Zen Buddhist quote. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. And just trying to embody that more for myself has been my journey. And like when you embrace that as like a grounding core way of being, then all sorts of cool and exciting synchronicities, I feel like, start happening, both in the people that come into your life and the joy you can experience in exchanging thoughts and ideas and play and love with them, and then other teachers. And would now should I share a few more things now? Or okay. So I shared a little bit from Dark Ecology. We will probably talk more about this book and the whole of it in later episodes, but I'll let that rest for now. I was going to bring up one other thing, but I'm just going to kind of go through a couple other things that for me have been really powerful in my quest for empowering myself and embracing my knowledge base and creative spirit as an artist and as a human. And I've sort of considered myself an atheist for most of my life, and I'm not necessarily come to a place where I am against that term, but I don't really like it so much anymore as a firm place to dwell in, because of the story it tells, though. But I have a specific story to tell about the word, and I think it's still important to my journey as a person. Growing up, I was never forced into a religion or going to church. We did go to a more progressive Christian church a few times when I was a younger person, just to check it out as a family and explore things, because my parents were into exploring consciousness and community and in all the ways. And so I think that's where a little bit of that exploration has lived on in my journey. And but meditation was always the most grounding sort of spiritual practice I had, but I always considered that outside of religion, and then especially as I got older, I could only see religious stories as ones of dominance and separation, and I still very much see religion primarily used as this mechanism to indoctrinate people into supporting things that they wouldn't necessarily do under their own spiritual, under their own creative and even religious, their individual core being. And there's a lot of wars and territory of the mind that are keeping us back from, I think, living in a story of inner being and creative co-creativity and reciprocal relationships, and that where more play and art and fun are the dominant ways of being in the world. A few years ago, I moved home from Los Angeles after after living there for almost 10 years. And it was a hard move because I wasn't fully I wasn't choosing to move home. I came to a place where I couldn't quite afford to live there anymore. I wasn't sustaining my art on my own, and I wasn't really wanting to go back into some of the day jobs that I had. And so I thankfully was given a place to move home to, though, and try to recollect my purpose a little bit and outlook on the world. And I came across this book. A few years ago, I read the book The War of Art, which I've talked about a lot, and it was very inspiring for really accepting who I am as an artist, and that there are these sort of normal tricks that we play on ourselves as humans to kind of discourage our own creative exploration. And then this book came along and it really helped further that journey for me, and really kind of help see that not just that I'm a creator and an artist, but that everybody on the planet is an artist and a creator, and that ultimately comes from source. And what is that? It's God to a lot of people, to an or goddess. To an atheist, I prefer the word creator, or I even prefer the pluralistic form creativity, that doesn't put it into a single entity, but an expansive one that is always twisting back on itself and always contracting and expanding. And I'm just going to read this one little part from The Artist's Way, and then, I mean, you can please interject. Like, I don't want to steal the floor here because you have some great things to say about this exact thing, but I'll just read. This is from the preface, the preface to The Artist's Way. And these are the basic principles. And the book, The Artist's Way, is written by Julia Cameron. She's an educator, and she has been teaching this book for decades now.
She's also a filmmaker, director, something like that, right?
I think she's a writer.
Oh.
Yes.
Done stuff with film.
In film, yes. And these are the basic principles of The Artist's Way. Creativity is the natural order of life. Life is energy, pure creative energy. There is an underlying, indwelling creative force infusing all of life, including ourselves. When we open ourselves up to our creativity, we open ourselves to the Creator's creativity within us and our lives. We are ourselves creations, and we in turn are meant to continue creativity by being creative ourselves. Creativity is God's gift to us. Using our creativity is our gift back to God. If you don't like the word God, I've come to a place where I don't mind it or embrace it, and I see it as an expansive word that means universe and endlessness and anything you choose
She says that in the book too, of like, replace the word as it works for you.
As it works for you. The refusal to be creative is self-will and is counter to our true nature. When we open ourselves to exploring our creativity, we open ourselves to God, good, orderly direction. As we open our creative channel to the Creator, many gentle but powerful changes are to be expected. It is safe to open ourselves up to greater and greater creativity. Our creative dreams and yearnings come from a divine source. As we move toward our dreams, we move toward our divinity.
Yeah. When you study feminist spirituality, you read a good amount of thoughts and articulations that exist outside of organized religion, but you also read a lot of reconceptualizations of religion within organized religion, which is really fun and fascinating. So I want to say that there has been and is constantly a lot of work to kind of keep the aspects of religious organizations that people love, the community, the sharing, the kind of like unity, solidarity, support, all that, celebration. In some are a lot less fun than that. But also shift it more into the original teachings and messages, and having feminist reinterpretations of that. One huge one is this co-opting, if you will, right? That like we are not the creators, we are the creation. And as far as I'm concerned, I see that as one of the bigger problems that exist within religion, that we are all creators as well. And that's kind of the little egg you gotta crack open, and then you know the secrets of the whole universe, but you have to truly believe them. And so the more that you can just experience yourself in a state of creativity and expression, the more you become entangled in the dance of all the magic in the world, and the more you're open to it, the more it reveals itself to you, has been my experience.
Yeah.
I have quite a bit of stories to share about like how magic, or what I conceptualize as magic, which for me, I just want to get out there in the open. I don't think of magic as like solely this ceremonial thing that must be done with like a wand and a sword and a cauldron and a spell. Although I do believe that there is a lot of fun to be had in that realm. But I really do see magic as like the true gift of the world when you're tapped into that state of emotion, intention, and interconnection. When you really understand those things and open yourself to like dwell in them and be in them and experience them simultaneously, to me that is magic. And that is the world. The world is magic. And so I think of, like art and creativity and like process and all of that as being a part of this like magical practice, which to me is also spiritual practice. And I think that's all I really have to share.
Yeah. Well, I think the story of a seed and a live music event share that same, for two kind of much different seeming things, that same spirit of magic are embodied in that the default is magic. And when you just are and you just be in the creativity of the universe and witness the seed growing into a flower, what is that if not magic? And what is being at a beautiful concert event with like an artist or band that you love, and that shared experience of the music washing over the audience, and then sometimes the song being sung back to the band. There's something beyond what we perceive as reality going on there that fills that room in that moment, that brings like a powerful energy there. And that's why people love going to church. And so
if they let you sing and have fun in church.
Right. And so that's where, like, the difference between religion and church, I think, I spoke enough about religion and God, but, I think it might be also important for me to clarify that, like, my atheism is not to disparage religion, and I may have spent some time dwelling in that in the past, because all I could see over and over again was religion being used for these tools of oppression and land dominance. And so I became a heavily critical, and sometimes unfairly and unnecessarily critical person towards religious people and religions as a whole. But I think when you start seeing that God as a concept is all of us and is creativity, and that we are creators because we are an extension of that goddess source of creativity, then that's where the magic lies. I think I could share one last little reading from Walt Whitman, maybe, because this is one of those books that, like you mentioned earlier on, that I always turn to if I need just kind of like a reaffirmation of love and beauty and creativity. And this is from the poem Leaves of Grass, the opening song of myself. I'm going to just read two quick parts. We actually posted this on our social media account, the beginning of this poem. I'm going to share this because it's to kind of cap off my kind of intention for this episode, which is to lean more into art and expression in those ways and celebrate artists of past, present, and future and those ways of expressing ourselves, and to do more of that myself. All right. Leaves of Grass, Song of Myself. 1. I celebrate myself and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. And now I'm going to skip because this is a very, very long poem, like tens of pages long, maybe 90 pages, I don't know. Anyway, this is the end of the second part. Have you reckoned 1,000 acres much? Have you reckoned the earth much? Have you practiced so long to learn to read? Have you felt so proud to get at the meaning of poems? Stop this day and night with me, and you shall possess the origin of all poems. You shall possess the good of the earth and sun. There are millions of suns left. You shall no longer take things at second or third hand, nor look through the eyes of the dead, nor feed on the specters in books. You shall not look through my eyes either, nor take things from me. You shall listen to all sides and filter them for yourself.
Good one. Our buddy Walt.
Walt. Love Walt. It's a great poem. I mean, I can't, if you've never read Walt Whitman, he just paints beautiful pictures of existence, and he really writes about, in this poetic and metaphorical and direct way, about this true nature that we are all one, and that the beauty is in the dance and the song and the poetry and in the birds and the bees and in the millers and the miners and in the chickens and in the skies and all of it.
That's very nice. I like thinking about that.
Nice.
Well, should we leave it there?
I think we can leave it there. I think we probably have some more realms to explore in this conversation of consciousness and energy, and we didn't even really touch on time and space, but I think that's probably a good place to cap off this episode, and then we can do a forthcoming one, going deeper into these things. Does that sound right? Does that sound good?
Yeah, we can pick up on time and space next time.
Beautiful.
Space-time.
Space-time.
Time-space.
Because I didn't even get to mention some of the movies that kind of encapsulate these things, but that'll be for next episode.
I think they don't necessarily want 3-hour episodes
No,
every
it's
time,
over.
so bye.
Bye. We should actually wave bye.
Oh yeah, okay. Bye. Oh, I was looking at the monitor. Do
Me
that
too.
one more
Okay,
time.
do it again. Okay, ready? Organically. Oh, I gotta open it back on my book because that's how it was. Okay.
This
All
is
right.
not at all staged.
No, not staged.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
I'm so not used to looking at the camera.
No.